Hello, Venerables. How are you? Hope you are feeling great. Well, welcome to week 11. And for this course, Essence of Buddhadhamma, welcome to lecture 11, the 5 aggregates. This lecture will be conducted as follows. We'll start off with conceptual understanding, then moving on to physical factor, the aggregate of form, mental factors, the aggregates of feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness, and then the 5 aggregates and the 3 universal characteristics, then the 5 aggregates and Abhidhamma. We will then end with a short break just into the 5 aggregates and Abhidhamma. After the break, then we will come back to finish the others. Okay? So now let us then move on to part 1, which is understanding. Now the 5 aggregates, well, different textbooks, right? They translate skanda or kanda in different ways. So some say the 5 aggregates, some say the 5 groups or bundles or collections are with body or form or materiality or physical phenomena or factors or physical processes, right? Again, different ways of translating. That's body, and then that's mind or name or mentality or mental phenomena or mental factors or mental processes. Yeah, so body is known as rupa, and then mind is known as nama. Now within mind, it is further divided into 4 aggregates, and this comprises feelings or sensations, vedana, perceptions or recognition or cognition, sanya or sajna, formations of volitional actions or karma formations or constructing activities, samskara or samkara, and consciousness or conscious awareness, vijnana or vijnana. Okay, so these are the 5 aggregates of body and mind. Body or matter, mind broken into sensation, perception, volition, consciousness. In Chinese, 5 aggregates is known as Wu Yun. And then body is She, mind is Shou Xiang Xing Shi, right? Sensation, perception, volition, consciousness. Now, the Buddhist analysis of personal experience or a personality self is framed in the context of the 5 aggregates. The 5 aggregates are the world for any given being. There's nothing else besides. When all the physical and mental factors are functioning together, we speak of personal experience or a personality or self. Okay, now last lecture we have already talked about not self, right? That there's no permanent self. So how do Buddhist teachings then analyze so-called self or personality or personal experience? Basically, it is understood in the context of 5 aggregates. So instead of a permanent self, this so-called self is actually just consisting of form and mind consists of feelings, consciousness, perception, and mental formation. So with these 5 aggregates, we can have an experience, or we speak of personal experience, we speak of a personality, we speak of a self. Okay, so as far as we're concerned, whatever things that are external to us, we can only know them through our experience. Yeah, whether it's a table or it's another person or it's flowers and trees, as we can only know them through our experience, through our personal experience, because of these 5 aggregates. All right, so this is just a conceptual understanding. Now let us then move on more into the physical factor, the form. Now the aggregate of form or matter or rupa refers to the material of physical factors of experience, whether in the body of a living being or in the outer world, the material objects that surround us, the tree, the earth, trees, buildings, and objects of everyday life. Okay, so when we talk about matter or body or form, basically they are physical or material factors. So it is found within us, and it is found also outside of us. Well, rupa consists of 4 basic elements or 4 basic forces known as Mahabhutani, and these 4 are solidity or extension represented by earth, that means something that is hard or soft. Yeah? Then cohesion or fluidity represented by water, okay, liquidity. Then heat represented by fire, like warmth, okay. And then motion represented by wind, movements, right, like our breath. So from the interaction of this, our body of flesh, blood, bones, etc. is composed. All right, so within our body, we have these 4 elements: earth, water, heat, fire, and wind. And again, we experience them, right? We are not talking, we experience them through our experience of hardness or softness for earth, like bones, yeah? And then through fluidity, like water, like our blood, and then through fire, right, to heat, like our body warmth, and then through wind, like our breath. And then outside of us, yeah, all physical matter, all material things are also composed of these 4 elements. Now, rupa also consists of derivatives, dappa rupa, of the 4 basic elements. Okay, so out of these 4 basic elements, there are other derivatives, other subproducts. And these are the 5 physical sense faculties or 5 sense organs, indriya, and the corresponding material objects, visaya, of those sense organs. So we have the eyes and the things that we see, right? Visible objects. The ears and the things that we hear, audible objects. The nose and olfactory objects, the things that we smell, yeah? The tongue and objects of taste, and the body or skin and tangible objects, objects that we touch. Okay, so we have rupa, the 4 elements, and then out of the 4 elements, we have derivatives, and these derivatives account for our 5 sense organs, physical sense organs, plus their objects. So altogether, there are 10. Now, besides the 5 physical sense organs, there is a 6th mental sense faculty or mental sense organ, which is called the mind or mind organ, known as mana or mano, whose objects are mental or mind objects or ideas or thoughts. So, ideas and thoughts which form a part of the world are produced and conditioned by physical experiences are and conceived by the mind. So this mind, this manas or mano, is considered a sense faculty or organ, indriya, just like the eye or the ear. And so here we have analysis in terms of the 12 sense bases or 12 sense spheres, ayatana, and these are the 6 senses, 5 physical senses and mind, and the 6 classes of objects of those senses. Okay, so earlier on we talked about the 5 physical senses. You can see in this picture here, and the objects, so eye and object, ear and sound, body and touch, tongue and taste, nose and smell. So 5 times 2, 10, right? And then the 6th sense organ is actually our mind. And mind, the objects are mental, right? Our thoughts, our ideas. So altogether we have 6 times 2. That adds up to 12. Yeah, so we have the 12 ayatana or 12 sense bases or the 12 sense spheres. Okay, simple enough. So this is part 2, physical factor, the aggregator form. Now then, let us move on to part 3, mental factors, which consists of 4, the aggregates of feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Well, physical elements by themselves are not enough to produce experience. The simple contact between eyes and visible objects or ears and audible objects cannot result in experience. Only when the eyes, a visible object, and consciousness come together is the experience of a visible object produced. This is the same for all the 6 sense organs. Consciousness must be present so as to produce experience. So earlier on for Rupa, we talked about the 12 objects, right? Our 6 sense organs plus their objects. But if we just talk about the 6 sense organs and the objects, we cannot have an experience. Yeah, we can only have an experience if we have the consciousness associated with these 6 sense objects. So this is what we mean by this paragraph, right? So for instance, take a look at this picture. We have eye, we have the object. But if it's just eye and object, we cannot experience anything. We must have eye consciousness. Then because of this 3, eye, object, and eye consciousness, we have contact. Then we can experience contact. All right? So let's move more into consciousness. Vijnana. Now, this consciousness of vijnana represents our awareness dimension. Well, mere or bare awareness, which has one of the 6 sense faculties as its base and one of the 6 corresponding objects as its object. For example, visual consciousness or chakku vijnana has the eye as its basis and the visible form as its object. Mental consciousness, mano vijnana, has the mind as its basis and a mental object as its object. Thus, there are 6 kinds of consciousness in relation to the 6 internal faculties and corresponding 6 external objects. So when we talk about analysis in terms of 18 elements or 18 dhatu, we are referring to the 6 senses, the 6 classes of sense object, and 6 classes of consciousness, right? Visual represents the eye, auditory represents the ear, olfactory, that smell, right, represents the nose, gustatory, that represents taste, yeah, our tongue, tactile, that represents touch, our body or skin, and then mental, that represents our mind. Okay, so when we talk about sensory contact or sensory stimulation, this refers to the combination of 3 factors. The sense faculty, for example, the eye, the sense object, the eye object, and the sense faculty consciousness, eye consciousness. So basically, in order for us to have a experience, yeah, we have not only these 6 senses, as you can see here in the picture, right, and their objects. So here we have already 12, but within each of this circle, right, we must have a consciousness. So you look at the second picture, vijnana, consciousness. Yeah, eyes for sight, ears for hearing, body for touch, tongue for taste, nose for smell. So we must have a consciousness, right, in order for us to have an experience. So we have on the left 6 plus their consciousness, respective consciousness, another 6. So altogether we add up to 18. So this represents the 18 elements or 18 dhatu. All right. So contact is only possible when these 3 come together: eye object and consciousness, or ear, sound and consciousness, body, touch and consciousness, tongue, taste and consciousness, nose, smell and consciousness, and then mind, mental objects and consciousness. So this is what we mean by sensory contact or sensory stimulation. Simple? All right. However, consciousness is only, right, bare awareness of the presence of an object, not one we would normally call personal experience. When the eye comes in contact with a color, for instance, blue, visual consciousness arises, which simply is awareness of the presence of a color. but it does not recognize that it is blue. The same mere awareness applies to the other 5 classes of consciousness. And so we talk about the consciousness dimension as awareness dimension. Now, just having this 6 sense organs and their 6 objects and their 6 consciousness can only give us an experience of bare awareness. All right, it cannot tell us more. So in order for us to have a complete experience, we must have all the other 3 aggregates coming in, right? Not just the body and consciousness, but also feeling, perception, and volition. Okay, so this is what we mean. Now, our everyday personal experience is produced through the functioning of the other 3 major mental factors of experience as well. The aggregate of feeling, the aggregate of perception, and the aggregate of volition or mental formation. These 3 aggregates function to turn this mere or bare awareness of the object into personal experience. Hence, consciousness always exists in conjunction with the other 4 aggregates. As the Buddha declares in the Samyutta Nikaya, volume 3, page 53 of the Pali Text Society translation, bhikkhus, though someone might say, apart from materiality, apart from feeling, apart from perception, apart from volitional formations, I will make known the coming and going of consciousness, its passing away and rebirth, its growth, increase, and expansion. That is impossible. So what we're saying here in these 2 paragraphs is that in order for us to have a complete personal experience, we must have all these 5 form as represented by body, and then feeling, perception, volition, consciousness as represented by the mind, right? So 5 aggregates. So it cannot, we cannot say that consciousness, that we can experience consciousness apart from these other 4 aggregates. So if you take a look at the picture on the right, consciousness, right, must be experienced together with the body as well as the aggregates of feelings, perception, and volition. This is what is meant by the quotation given in this Samyutta Nikaya. Okay, so basically, whenever we have an experience, we must have these 5 aggregates. Without these 5 aggregates coming together, we cannot have an experience. All right, so since these 3 other aggregates besides body and consciousness are also important, let us now look at each of them in turn. So let us then start off with feelings. Feelings or sensations, Vedana. This represents the emotive or the affective dimension. Now, there can be 3 types of feelings or sensations, and they are pleasant, unpleasant, and indifferent or neutral, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So you take a look at this picture here, right? Blue, right? You see a smile, that represents pleasant feeling or sensation. The gray one, flat, yeah? That represents indifferent, neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And then you see the red one, right? A frown, that represents unpleasant. Now, when an object is experienced, that experience takes on one of these 3 emotive or affective tones, either the tone of pleasure, the tone of displeasure, or the tone of indifference. Okay? And this is why we call feelings or sensations the emotive or affective dimension. So the basic 3, whenever we have an experience, is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Now, this 3 can be further broken down into 5 types. If we divide pleasure and displeasure in terms of bodily and mental feelings or sensations, so we can have bodily pleasure called sukha and mental pleasure called somanasa, or bodily displeasure called dukkha and mental displeasure called domanassa. When we talk about difference, there's no physical or mental, right? Indifference is just mental. So the aggregate of feelings has sensory contact as its immediate condition, and what one feels, that one perceives, the Mahavedala Sutta tells us. So basically, once we are conscious of something, right, we will have a feeling. And that feeling can be pleasant, either in terms of bodily pleasant or mentally pleasant. So for instance, if we like to eat mango, okay, so when we eat it, we have mental pleasure. If we're not eating mango, but just the thought of mango gives us a mental pleasure, then this is another kind of pleasure. Okay, so it could be either mental pleasure or bodily pleasure. That's two. And then we can also have bodily displeasure and mental displeasure. So for instance, if we hate laksa, okay, but we have to eat it, then that becomes physical displeasure. And then sometimes, just thinking of laksa, because we hate it, right, can gives us mental displeasure. So another two, right? So 2 plus 2, or we don't mind laksa, right? We are indifferent. So plus indifference, 5. Okay? So when we talk about feelings or sensations, the basic is pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. If we think it in terms of 5, then it will be pleasant, either mental or bodily, unpleasant, either mental or bodily, and then indifferent. Indifferent is mental. Simple? All right. So every experience will lead us to have feelings. Then let us move on to perceptions or cognition, and that's sanya, and this represents the conceptual dimension. Now, the process of recognition or identification or mental labeling or interpretation of sensory and mental objects, for example, something we experience as blue, sweet, or soft, this is what we call our conceptual dimension, right? This is what we call sanya, perceptions, recognition, and cognition. So here we are talking about attaching a name to an object of experience. Perception means our ability to relate present sensory contact to past experience and thereby recognize the sense data. Okay, so look at this picture here. So let's say there's a green apple in front of us, right? Now, if we don't have perception, we will know just that, there's an object and with some color, right? With a shape, but as to what it is, we do not know. But when we have perception, recognition coming in, then we've learned before that whenever we see this kind of thing, then this is an apple and a green apple. So perception helps us to identify something, right? To attach a label to the object that we come into contact with. Perception helps us to recognize this object, yeah, and perception helps us to interpret this object, yeah. So this is what we mean by perception. Okay, well, in the book Buddhism for Beginners, instead of calling it perceptions, the book uses ideas, yeah, ideas to represent this dimension, ideas or concepts to represent this dimension. So the function of perception is to turn an indefinite inexperience into an identifiable, recognizable one. Here, we're speaking of the formulation of a conception or a definite, determinate idea about a particular object of experience. Without a perception, a person might be conscious or aware, but would be unable to know what he was conscious of. That's why sanya, we call it the conceptual dimension. And how do we know this? Through a process of learning, right? So for instance, we're a baby, yeah? And then when we see a green apple, at first we do not know what it is, right? And then our mother tells us, this is an apple, and this color is green. So we learn, this is a green apple. So through this process of learning, we build up our conceptual dimension. We have sanya, we have recognition, we have mental labeling, we have identification, yeah? We have interpretation, or sometimes misinterpretation, right? If we're not careful. Yeah, often our perceptions play trick on us, and we have misinterpretations instead of the correct interpretations. Okay, so perceptions are necessary in order for us to experience something. Then let's just move on to the fifth aggregate, which is or mental formation, sankhara, and this represents our moral dimension. Well, included here are all volitional activities that produce wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral karmic effects. Volition can be described as a conditioned response to the object of experience, including the meaning of habit. Just as our present objections are conditioned by past actions, so our responses here and now are motivated and directed by volition. Now, when we talk about this aggregate of volition or mental formation, samkara, basically we're talking about karma, right? And then karma, of course, represents the moral dimension. It is either wholesome or unwholesome, or it can be neutral. Yeah, like when we're sleeping, right? It's a neutral karma because we're not creating any wholesome or unwholesome karma. Okay, in the book Buddhism for Beginners, instead of using the term volition or mental formation, it basically says that this aggregate is represented by habits and attitudes. Yeah, it's our conditioned responses. So take a look at this picture. So as we said before, in order for us to have a simple experience, we must have our body represented by form, right? Let's say an eye, that contact represented by object plus the consciousness coming together. Then eye, object, and consciousness with contact. Okay. Then once we have this contact, we will have sensation, feeling, and then from sensation, feeling, we will have perception, or cognition, recognition, labeling, and then feeling again, right, together with it. And once we have these four aggregates, then the next thing is our volition, here represented by impulses, right? Volition or impulses or mental formations. Basically, once we have this, what is our reaction, our response to it? This is what we mean by volition. Okay? The author of The Tree of Enlightenment tells us that the terms volition and mental formation are used together because each of these terms represents one half of the meaning of the original term. So in this case, mental formation represents the half that comes from the past, and volition represents the half that functions here and now. So mental formation and volition worked together to determine our responses to the objects of experience, and these responses have moral consequences in the form of wholesome, unwholesome, and neutral effects. And this is what we mean by moral dimension. So let's take a look at this picture. The left picture is a quotation. What you are is what you have been. What you will be is what you do now. So what you are is what you have been. Let's say at this moment of experience and contact, okay? How I respond to this contact, part of it will be accounted for how in the past I have been responding to this contact. So what you are is what you have been, right? And then the other half of my response will be how I respond now, right? What I will be is what I do now. So how I respond now will determine how I respond in future. Okay, so so basically this is what we mean by volition, right? Habits and attitudes in terms of our responses. So another way of putting it, how we experience and react. All right, so we have form plus consciousness. Okay, form is represented by our 6 internal sense bases and the 6 external objects. Then plus consciousness, we have contact. Okay, so contact is represented by awareness of the experience. And then once we have contact, we will compare with our memories and beliefs. Is it pleasant? Unpleasant? Not pleasant? No. Unpleasant? That means neutral. And then our perception will tell us what it is, the mind's assessment, the mental impression. Then the formations. Formations, we've said that it is our response, right? Here it mentions emotions, never mind. And then once we have that, we have reaction. Okay, so this chart shows contact or awareness, conditioning, and then reaction. So basically, we can also see it as form plus consciousness plus feeling plus perception give us a mental formation, which is the reaction, yeah, our habits and attitudes. So let us consider an example better. Now, in all our daily activities, we can see how the 5 aggregates work together to produce personal experience. So, at this moment, for instance, there is contact between 2 elements of the aggregate of form. Let's say that you are reading, okay, or reading the lecture notes. Yeah, if you're reading lecture 11 notes, we are on page 5 now. If not, it's okay. Just listen to this PowerPoint presentation, and then you can review this lecture notes subsequently. So imagine if you're reading this lecture notes now, we have contact, yeah, between the letters on this lecture notes and our eyes, okay? Then our consciousness, right, becomes aware of the letters. So we have eyes, we have the eye object, which is this lecture notes, the letters, and then our consciousness help us to become aware of the letters. Then our aggregate of perception identifies the words that are written here. Oh, so look at this lecture notes. What is it written, right? We have learned, oh, this WORDS words means is read as words. Okay, so through a learning process, we identify these letters as words, WORDS. And then our aggregate of feeling produces an emotional response. How do we respond to the letters that we have come across on this lecture notes? Oh, is it pleasure, displeasure, or indifference? Then our aggregate of volition responds with a conditioned reaction or a habit. We either sit at attention, we daydream, or perhaps we experience restlessness. Okay, so let's say you take a look at this lecture notes now. You recognize it as lecture notes of Essence of Buddhadhamma. Well, if you enjoy this class, Essence of Buddhadhamma, then when you do this lecture notes, you sit at attention. That is your habit. That is your volition, right? But if you don't like Essence of Buddhadhamma, you may, instead of focusing your attention on this lecture notes, you may be daydreaming, right? Like this picture here. This guy is daydreaming of something else. Or perhaps if you're not interested in, then you may become very restless. You may say, oh, I want to go to the toilet now, and you just find an excuse. Okay, so this is what we mean by volition. Yeah, the 5 aggregates coming together. When we have the first 4 aggregates coming together, then your volition will determine how you react. Yeah. Now, if you're very mindful every moment, right? Then every moment we can choose how we respond. That's why mindfulness is so important, right? But if we are not mindful at that particular moment, then our habits will come into play, right? Then our habits will tell us how to respond. So let's say if we have wholesome habits, then it is okay. Our response now, this moment, will be wholesome. But if we have unwholesome habits, then that's where the problem becomes, right? Then our response now will also be unwholesome. That's why in our practice of mindfulness, we want to be as far as possible to be mindful of every moment so that we can determine our response and make sure that if we recognize it as something wholesome, we respond in a wholesome manner. And then if it's something unwholesome, we make sure that we counteract it and respond it in a neutral or wholesome way. All right. So that's the relevance of mindfulness practice. So if you study Buddhadhamma further, Buddhadhamma actually breaks down every moment, a thought or experience into 17 moments. And the first 10 moments represents the first 4 aggregates coming into effect, right? And then volition comes in the last 7 moments, okay? And it is this last 7 moments that determine our karma, whether it is wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral. That's why, again, mindfulness practice is so important. And of course, every moment happens so quickly that more often than not, we are not aware of it. That's why it is so important to learn to be as mindful as possible. Okay, the more mindful that we are, the more wholesome karma we can create instead of creating unwholesome karma. All right, so we have gone through these 5 aggregates. So to summarize, right, an individual experience can be analyzed as consisting of various phenomena that can be conveniently classified as forming 5 aggregates. That is, bodily phenomena and mental phenomena. And mental phenomena is further divided into feelings, perceptions or recognition, volitional activities, and conscious awareness. Okay, so what we normally think in conventional terms that we describe as a self, that as a personality or as a personal experience, basically just consists of these 5 aggregates, as you can see in this right picture: the form representing the 6 senses, yeah, the body, and then the mind representing the other 4. Feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Consciousness, the product of the 6 senses. Perception, experiences and encounters, interpret them, right? Label them, recognize them. And then mental formation, responses according to conditions. All right? Shaped by our past, and if we're mindful, shaped by this very moment too. Okay, so we have covered the 5 aggregates. Now let us then move on to the relationship between and the 3 universal characteristics, which we have covered last lecture, right? The 3 universal characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not self. Now, how are they related to these 5 aggregates? Let us talk about impermanence. Yeah? Now, the nature of the 5 aggregates, each and all of them are in constant change. All the physical and mental factors of our experience, like our bodies, the physical objects around us, our minds and our ideas, are impermanent and constantly changing. They are processes, not things. They are dynamic, not static. Hence, we can alter our habits. We can learn to be kind and compassionate. We can acquire the attitudes of generosity, equanimity, and other virtues. Right? Last lecture we talked about impermanence. Impermanence as a universal characteristic, impermanence as a mark of existence. So when we analyze them, when we break down into the 5 aggregates, every aggregate itself is constantly changing, right? Matter, our body is constantly changing. Our sensation is constantly changing. Our perception is constantly changing. Our volition is constantly changing. Our consciousness is constantly changing. Yeah, that's why our five aggregates are also all taken together, constantly changing, impermanent. And because of these constant changes, this impermanence, that's why we can learn how to be good, right? We can learn how to be wholesome, yeah? Because everything is dynamic, yeah? Everything is not permanent, everything is not static. Because everything is dynamic and everything is fluid, so as long as you are mindful of every moment, right, we can choose we can respond in a wholesome manner. So it is by responding in a wholesome manner that we can build up our virtues, right, of generosity, of equanimity, and other qualities. Okay, so this is the relationship between the five aggregates and impermanence. Now, what about the suffering, right, and the five aggregates? Well, in our lecture 5, right, when we talk about the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, we have already come across this quotation. This is the first noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, dying is suffering, sorrow, grief, pain, unhappiness, and unease are suffering. Being united with what one is not like is suffering. Separation from what is like is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In short, the five aggregates of grasping are suffering. Now, in lecture 5 on the Noble Truths, we have explained, yeah, the various kinds of suffering already, except the last phrase. In short, the five aggregates of grasping are suffering. So now in this lecture, we can explain further why these five aggregates of grasping are suffering. Now, the five aggregates of grasping is also can be translated also as clinging or attachment, right? The five aggregates of clinging, the five aggregates of attachment, or upadana kanda, upadana skanda. Yeah, Buddhism teaches that, holds that none of the phenomena which make up personality is free from suffering because they are objects of grasping due to craving and ignorance. Okay, so we have these five aggregates, right? Form, feeling, perception, mental, formation, consciousness, as represented in this left picture. And then we have the second noble truth telling us the cause of suffering, right? That is craving and ignorance. Now, because of the presence of craving and ignorance, every of these five aggregates is also grasping, clinging, attaching all the time. So because of our ignorance and craving leads to every one of our aggregate clinging, grasping, and attaching all the time. That's why we have suffering. Okay, so this is the relationship between the five aggregates of grasping and suffering. Now, the grasping process, or the clinging or the attachment process, manifests in three ways. This is mine, etam mama. This I am, esoham asmi. And this is myself, eso me atta. Yeah, we have come across this last lecture. So because of these three ways of this basic three ways of clinging is, as we have mentioned in an earlier lecture, is divided into these various groups too, right? These various kinds. So we have clinging to the self-doctrine. That means this is mine, yeah? This I am, this is myself. So we have the self-notion coming about. And once we have this self-notion coming about, we will be clinging to all kinds of wrong views, right? Because our views will be colored by this sense of a notion, this notion of self, okay? And once we have this self coming in, once we have wrong views, then we have clinging to rites and rituals, we have clinging to rules and vows, right? Yeah. thinking that just rites and rituals or rules and vows can lead to enlightenment, but of course that's not true, right? They are part of our training, but not to enlightenment in Buddhism, and then in other religions too, right? Rites, well, other religions may think that rites and rituals or vows and rules may be enough, but in Buddhism that is not the case. And then because of this, we also have clinging to sense pleasure, clinging to all our sense organs and the sense objects. Okay, so again, this is the relationship between the 5 aggregates of grasping or clinging and suffering. Now, moreover, the 5 aggregates that have become the object of grasping are in a state of constant change, in a state of continuous flux with no persisting substance, and are not under our. Thus, by identifying ourselves with what is impermanent, anicca, with what does not come under our full control, anatta, we come to suffering. In short, life and samsaric existence is suffering. Okay? Now we have already said that our body within us, right, and outside of us, everything consists of the 5 aggregates, right? So external matters, the physical matters, we experience them through our 5 aggregates. Now, because these 5 aggregates are constantly changing, right? Because they are impermanent, they are beyond our control, right? They're beyond our control. And if we think that we can control them, then that leads to our suffering. Because once we have ignorance and once we have craving, then we think that we want to control them. That's why we have suffering. So these 5 aggregates, because of these 3 marks of existence, leads to suffering. And because these 5 aggregates influence the whole of existence in the samsara world, in our cycles of birth and rebirth and death, we say that samsara itself is suffering, right? Remember that anything that is external, outside of our body and mind, we can only know them through our 5 aggregates, right? So within our body and mind, that's all. It is enough, right? We experience everything, as the Buddha taught us. We experience samsara, we experience nirvana, depending on how we practice. Okay? Then let us move on to the relation, the 5 aggregates and not self. Now, what is the use of this analysis of personal experience in terms of the 5 aggregates? What is the use of this reduction of the apparent unity of personal experience into the elements of form, feeling, perception, volition, or mental formation, and consciousness? The purpose is to create the wisdom of not self. What we wish to achieve is a way of experiencing the world that is not constructed on and around the idea of a self. We want to see personal experience in terms of processes, in terms of personal, impersonal functions, rather than in terms of a self. And what affects a self? Because this will create an attitude of equanimity, which will help us undermine grasping and attachment, and overcome the emotional disturbances of hope and fear about the things of the world. Okay, so basically we're saying here that the 5 aggregates, because they are constantly changing, they also represent not self. All right, so once we have this not self, what to do with it? We have already covered this in last lecture, right? How to apply it in daily life. This is just a summary, right? Once we know that there is not self, then that should help us to lessen our grasping, our attachment, our clinging. So in the process, lessen our greed, our last, right? So because of this, we'll be able to, let's say, whenever we have to interact with people, right? When we have to communicate with people, we can focus on the processes, on the work that they do, rather than attacking their personality, right? So let's say you and your Dharma brother are working together on a project. If something is not going smoothly, you can say that, oh, your Dharma brother perhaps is not paying his attention, right, on that project. That's why the project is not proceeding smoothly. Yeah, what you should not say is, oh, your Dharma brother, he's so stupid, or he's so silly, or he's so lazy, right? So don't blame him, right? So whenever we interact with people, we try to focus on the processes, on the work, rather than attacking personality. Attacking personality is what President Trump is very good at, of course, right? Look at the debates between him and the other presidential candidate, Joe Biden, right? He's always attacking personalities, yeah? But somebody who is mature and wise, who understands not self, right, will not attack personality, will focus on the work processes that has gone wrong, right? And just try to rectify, correct the work processes. So if we can do this all the time, then we can be equanimous, okay? So let's talk a little bit more about equanimity. Now, the 8 worldly conditions are: we hope for happiness, we fear pain, we hope for praise, we fear blame, we hope for gain, we fear loss, we hope for fame, we fear infamy. We live in a state of alternate hope and fear. We experience these hopes and fears because we understand happiness, pain, and so forth in terms of the self. We understand them as personal happiness and pain, personal praise and blame, and so on. All right? If we focus on ourselves, right? If we think that ourself is permanent and we need to protect ourselves, then when we come across these 8 conditions, yeah, on the left, right? You see they are opposites, then we will react. Then we will crave for, let's say, happiness, and we will be averse to suffering. We will crave for fame. We will be averse to disrepute. We will crave for gain, and then we will be averse to loss. And we will crave for praise, and we will be averse to blame. And so in life, right, our emotions will be up and down all the time. We cannot be equanimous if we are always clinging to ourself. Now, once we understand everything ourselves in terms of impersonal processes, and once through this understanding of a not self, we get rid of the idea of a self, then we can overcome hope and fear. We can regard all the 8 worldly conditions with equanimity, yeah, with even-mindedness. Only then will we no longer be subject to the imbalance of alternating between hope and fear. Okay, so on the right, the Buddhadhamma, 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, recognition and disregard, gain and loss, pleasure and sorrow, come and go like the wind, rest like a giant tree in the midst of them all. So we must be like a giant tree in the forest, right? Resting and equanimous, right? No matter the wind blowing in any of these 8 directions, we are like the giant tree, equanimous. This is how we can respond wisely in a wholesome manner to all these 8 worldly winds. Okay, so we have looked at the relationship between the 5 aggregates and the 3 universal characteristics. So let us spend a few minutes there. The 5 aggregates and Abhidhamma. Well, just before that, look at this picture, right? When we talk about equanimous, apart from being equanimous to the 8 worldly winds, we should also learn to be impartial, equanimous and impartial to all kinds of discriminations, right? So when I see you through my eyes, I think that we're different. When I see you through my heart, I know we're the same, right? It doesn't matter whether male or female, no matter the skin of our color, whether we're young or old, whether we belong to this society or this culture, whether we are able or disabled, whether we are of one or other sexual orientation, whether we are of one religion or other, we should be impartial and treat everybody equally and equanimously, right? Have an open mind and open heart. Okay, and on this note, yes, we can go on to the and Abhidhamma. So basically, we have already taken a look at 5 aggregates. So what we want to do now, and for second half of the lecture, is to first look at a closer look, right? We want to have a closer look at the relationship between the 5 aggregates and Abhidhamma. Now, a person is only a constant flow of the 5 aggregates. In Buddhist thought, in the centuries after the death of the Buddha, this probing analysis was taken further, and even the 5 aggregates as simple unities were seen as obscuring a further disillusion analysis into a plurality of further elements. This analysis came to embrace not just the psychophysical aggregates of conscious beings, that means body and mind, but also to include all things in the universe. These elements were known as dharmas, or phenomena, or factors. They form the psychophysical building blocks or component processes of the world as experienced by us. So what we're saying in these 2 paragraphs is that, okay, the 5 aggregates refer to our body and mind. Yeah, subsequently in the Abhidhamma, these 5 aggregates are broken down into what we call dharmas, or phenomena, or factors of experience. All right, and everything, yeah, inside and outside of us, comprised of all these dharmas, these phenomena, or factors of experience. Well, the Abhidhamma sets out to offer a list of all the types of dharmas into which experiences can be analyzed and understood. This task of the Abhidhamma has 5 aspects. First, to define dharmas. Second, to ascertain the relationship between dharmas. Third, to analyze dharmas. Fourth, to classify dharmas. And fifth, to arrange dharmas in numerical order. Such explanations are provided in the first 3 books of the Theravadin Abhidhamma, the Dhamma Sangani, or enumeration of dharmas, and Vibhanga, book of analysis, and Dhatu Kata, discourse on elements. In doing so, the Abhidhamma uses technical language to express ultimate or supramundane or absolute truth, in contrast to the use of ordinary language to express conventional or mundane or relative truth. The Abhidhamma therefore offers highly empirical, inductive, and logical analysis of our mind and mental experiences, the products of introspective meditation. Okay, so in our earlier lectures, we have talked about the Tipitaka. Look at this chart here. We have the Vinaya Pitaka, the monastic rules, right? Discipline. Then with the Sutta Pitaka, the discourses, Dika Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya, Khuddaka Nikaya. Now in the Nikaya, there are lots of examples, right? Usually we use ordinary language to express them. Then third component of the Tipitaka is the Abhidhamma Pitaka with 7 books, and particularly in the first 3 books, Dhamma Sangani, Vibhanga, and Dhatu Kata, this further breaks down, right, the 5 aggregates into different kinds of dharmas and functioning in 5 ways, right, as we have mentioned. Define, ascertain the relationship, analyze, classify, and arrange dharmas. Okay, and the way they do it is in more technical language to express ultimate truth. Okay, so that's why we say that the Abhidhamma is more abstract, more conceptual, right, in comparison to the Sutta, and it is therefore more difficult to understand. All right, but not to worry. Next, in your third semester, you have 1 whole course on Abhidhamma Pitaka. So when we come back in the second half of our lecture, we will just look a little bit more at Buddhadhamma, right? Just to give you a taste of what Buddhadhamma is all about. Okay, so this ends our first half of the lecture. Please go for your break. Thank you.